Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're jumping right into a really fascinating explainer. We're going to unpack the very architecture of modern digital authority. It's a deep philosophical dive into a system called Codatta. Now, you guys already know how the internet has operated for decades, right? We've basically relied on these incredibly loose proxy metrics to figure out who to trust. Think follower counts, verification badges, or honestly just the sheer volume of someone's output. But the source material we're looking at today, it completely flips that status quo on its head. By the end of this, you're going to have a totally new framework for how information is actually vetted. You'll probably start looking at every single piece of content you consume through a much more structural lens.
Is trust assigned or earned? Just let that sit for a second. Think about your own habits online. When you're scrolling and you see a bold claim or a new piece of data, do you just instantly hand over your trust? Or do you demand that the author actually earns it first? This right here, this is the core conflict of our entire digital age, right out of the gate. We're living in this wild era of absolute information surplus, but we have a massive deficit of actual, reliable credibility. We're basically forced to make these rapid-fire decisions about what's real and what's totally fake. And how a network answers this specific question, assigned versus earned, well, that literally dictates the reality it ends up building. If it's just assigned, fragile. If it's earned, the whole foundation changes.
Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the flaw of instant trust.
So, to really appreciate the solution here, we've got to understand why our current habits are basically broken. The text starts with this profoundly simple yet totally crucial statement. Trust shouldn't be assigned instantly. It's a real warning about the danger of our current digital landscape. Because right now, let's be honest, we all rely on cognitive shortcuts. We make these super subjective, split-second judgments because who has the time to rigorously vet every single tweet or post? We spot a confident tone, or actually scratch that. It's more like we see a giant follower count, and we just instantly assume they must know what they're talking about. But assigning trust like that, it's treating credibility like it's some sort of aesthetic choice instead of a hard, measurable metric. It's a completely unstable foundation, and frankly, it explains exactly why the internet feels so chaotic right now. And then the source follows up with this powerhouse of an assertion. I believe it should be earned. The weight of that one word, earned, it changes the whole game. See, when trust is just assigned, it's a gift. It's given away with zero friction. But when it's earned, that requires deliberate, grueling effort. It demands a historical track record. And most importantly, it completely shifts the burden of proof. It takes the responsibility off of us, the consumers, and puts it squarely on the person making the claim. They have to actually prove they're reliable before you ever have to believe a word they say. It's a massive philosophical pivot from lazy assumptions to demanding true, hard-won credibility.
Which brings us to Section 2, introducing dynamic reputation.
So if we know instant trust is a trap, how does a system actually measure and enforce this idea of earned trust? Well, this is where Codatta enters the picture. Codatta's entire philosophy is built around tracking reputation dynamically. It's the specific engine driving the shift away from static authority. Think about how authority usually works today. It's incredibly static, right? You get a fancy degree, or you buy a blue checkmark, and boom, you keep it forever. Honestly, it doesn't even matter if your output goes completely downhill for the next 10 years, you still get to flaunt that initial badge of authority. Well, Codatta completely rejects that model. Instead of a permanent badge, it treats your reputation like a living, breathing metric that you have to constantly maintain. Now, what's really interesting is how the source breaks down exactly what tracking dynamically means. It literally means the network learns who consistently provides strong signals, and then it actively adjusts trust accordingly. It's real-time, and it never stops evaluating. A strong signal here basically means a high-quality, verifiable inputs. So if you provide accurate data today, great, your trust score goes up. But if you get lazy or you start pushing bad info tomorrow, your score drops immediately. The network is always watching, always learning. Your reputation isn't some monument to your past glories anymore. It's a direct, real-time reflection of your actions right now. You're literally only as credible as your most recent history of being right. Moving right along to Section 3, the power of repeated accuracy. And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast between two totally different eras of the internet. In the old way, the one we're trying to escape, contributors gained authority just because they showed up early, or frankly, because they figured out how to speak the loudest. It was all about rewarding volume, algorithmic gaming, pure spectacle. You post the most, you win the conversation. But the new way completely shatters that. You don't get authority by being the loudest or the flashiest. You get it through one thing, repeated accuracy. It is a strict, unyielding demand for consistent correctness over the long haul. It completely levels the playing field.
The loudest voice doesn't win anymore. The most accurate voice wins, regardless of when they join the platform.
Let's walk through how this actually flows step by step. Step 1. The contributor has to provide strong signals. Like we just said, that means demonstrating repeated accuracy over time, providing claims that actually hold up to scrutiny. Step 2. The network observes that behavior and it learns. It catalogs those signals, effectively building this permanent ledger of your reliability. And then Step 3. The network actively adjusts your trust level based on that exact ledger. It takes this big, abstract idea of earning trust and turns it into a totally functional, highly visual process. It's a continuous, unbreakable loop: action, evaluation, adjustment. You can't bypass the loop, and there is absolutely no way to fake the evaluation. Let's transition into Section 4 and see how this builds when truth compounds.
We've covered the philosophy and the mechanics, but let's look at the ultimate result of this rigorous process on a macro level. When you have an ecosystem that just flat out rejects instant assignment and demands repeated accuracy from everyone, the source notes it creates something incredibly rare: an ecosystem where truth actually compounds. Think about that word, compounds. It's like compound interest in your savings account, right? Where your interest earns its own interest. Truth in this network literally multiplies upon itself. When you layer accurate information from one highly trusted contributor on top of verified data from another trusted contributor, the overall integrity of the whole ecosystem just skyrockets. It gets exponentially denser and more reliable. It creates this baseline of reality that bad actors just cannot penetrate, simply because the cost of trying to fake that much repeated accuracy is impossibly high.
Which leads us to this massive realization from the text. Codatta turns credibility into infrastructure. Just let the scale of that sink in for a second. We are no longer talking about a subjective human feeling. Trust isn't just a vague vibe check anymore. It's not a gut instinct you get from looking at someone's profile. It's made this monumental leap into becoming a hard, structural reality. Think about physical infrastructure: roads, bridges, the power grid. We trust them implicitly because they're built to strict, measurable engineering standards. The source is arguing that Codatta is doing the exact same thing, but for credibility. It becomes the literal digital utility that the entire ecosystem runs on. To really hammer home the core takeaway of this entire explainer, what we're watching is a massive migration. We're packing up and moving from a world of subjective trust, where credibility is basically a total guessing game driven by volume and attention, into a world of measurable infrastructure. The explicit goal here is making trust measurable instead of subjective. By continuously tracking that repeated accuracy, this architecture takes this invisible, deeply flawed human concept of trust, digitizes it, quantifies it, and hard codes it right into the network itself. It's a real game changer. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought, based on everything we've just uncovered. If the architecture of authority fundamentally changes, and if trust truly becomes measurable infrastructure rather than just a subjective feeling, who will you trust tomorrow? Seriously, how are your own digital habits going to shift when you can see exactly who has actually earned their credibility through repeated accuracy and who's just making noise? It is a fascinating paradigm shift, and honestly, it gives us so much power as focused learners trying to navigate the complexities of the information age. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this one, guys. Keep demanding earned authority in everything you explore.